Hello, my name is Eunha Kim from Presbyterian University and Theological Seminary in Korea. I'm going to talk about the strategies on the participation of women in the churches. The purpose of this study is to introduce a hidden church history in the early 20th century. So I distributed my written paper. I will discuss the topic based on the PowerPoint. The outline of my presentation looks like this. First, I'm going to start by introducing the historical backgrounds behind the focusing assembly of the World Council of Churches. Next, I will give the strategies to enlarge the status of women in the churches. Then, I will show you the elevating numbers of women leadership in the WCC. In the early 20th century, there were two important events. One was the World Missionary Conference in Edinburgh, and the other was Women's Home Missionary Society that was held from 1911 to 12 in the United States. This photo taken at the 1910 Edinburgh Conference. The ecumenical movements proceeded by uniting the International Missionary Council and Faith in Order movements and Life and Work movement. In this process, the relationship between younger generation in the majority world and the older churches in Europe and North America arose a hot issue. Another issue was the place of women in the churches. This photo was taken by the Women's Home Missionary Society in the United States. As you can see, there were a lot of women missionaries by the time. The rapid increase in women missionaries was thanks to the women's work in the missionaries project, such as one by the Jenana mission. Advertisements like this recruited women who wanted to be trained and be sent missionary. And this table shows the number of women missionaries dedicated to mission work by the year of 1895. According to this table, women missionaries doubled the number of men. However, the ecumenical movements developed, the position of women decreased. This was the delegates were chosen only from among churches leaders rather than among missionaries. As I told you, the majority of missionaries were women by the time. So, the first step, what the women do. The first step is standing up. There were only 7 women who participated in Lausanne meeting out of 400 delegates. The women delegates officially expressed their discomfort about the discriminatory situation in the church. They declared that women and men were created equal by God and should be treated as such a church and society. The second step is the documenting for the historical momentum. Pioneering women leaders started to write articles about the role of a woman in the church and society. They stressed that churches were losing talented women because of the conservatism of the churches and the absence of vision. One important instance is the arguments about the relationship of men and women between Henrietta Bishop Hooft and Calvert. This photo is the letter who wrote Henrietta Bishop Hooft to Calvert. Another step is holding leadership accountable. women leaders observed the World Council of Churches preparatory meeting to see whether women's issues and perspectives were included in the planning time. Mrs. Twila Cabot, who was the wife of one of the representative, and also she was a worldwide WCA officer. She concerned about the status of women in the churches. So Mrs. Twila wrote to William Bishop Hooft to ask for the WCC Planning Committee should support women by their project. In response to this request, the World Council of Churches decided to undertake a study on the life and work of women in the churches. The next step is the surveying. For the study of the life and work of women in the churches, a survey was carried out under the direction of Mrs. Cabot. She sent a letter worldwide to survey women's situation in the church. She encouraged them to associate with others in their reply, and recognizing that women were most creative than they work community, rather than individually, or isolation. They obtained responses from 58 countries and produced a memorandum between 50 to 100 pages in length with supporting documents. Next step is convening. Women leaders held a pre-assembly meeting at Bonn and near Amsterdam on the August 13th to 17th in 1948. Women leaders from 17 countries gathered to go over the surveyed material and prepare the reports to set up an agenda for the World Council of Churches Amsterdam Assembly. And the report was submitted the Assembly Committee by the session of the concern of the churches. At the 1948 General Assembly in Amsterdam, Sarah Chako represents on the status of women in the church based on the conducted study and proposed the Women's Committee be formed. The proposal was accepted, and the Women's Life and Work of the Life and Work of Committee. The proposal was accepted, and the Committee on the Life and Work of Women in the Church was formed with Sarah Chako as the chairperson. When Sarah Chako became a leader of a new committee on the life and work of women in the churches, she organized the women's gathering at the Beausset near Geneva. An advisory committee was set up to guide the office to produce theological papers, holding consultation, and establish a global network of women, and keep issues alive in the churches. They developed lay theology to expand the status of women in the churches. At last, in 1951, the World Council of Churches Central Committee elected Sarah Chako as the president of the World Council of Churches in Asia. She thought the women's community should cooperate with men as well as women in the church and society. Hence, in 1954, she changed the name of the Women's Committee to Department of Cooperation of Men and Women in the Church and Society. The office was established in Geneva. And also, in 1952, she hosted two big events in India. One was the 5th General Central Committee of the World Council of Churches in her school, and the other was the third students' conference was held in her hometown. The purpose of the hosting these events was to aid in mutual exchange and the communication between East and the West. She hoped the healing and reconciliation of the wounded world by giving space for women, for the church leaders to cooperate. These were the leaders who came to India. According to this table, the World Sunday School Association and World Student Christian Federation and World Council of Churches and Worldwide WCA and World YMCA all participated. Can you imagine? In 1952, almost all of the world church leaders gathered in India to empower the youth and the future generation. This was through Sarah Chako's contribution. It was amazing, right? But this was demanding a big task to her, which contributed to her death after the last event. So sorry about that. In her efforts, they enlarged the position of a woman in Asian churches. She may have overworked herself. This table shows the number of women delegates in the World Council of Churches from 1948 to 2013. According to this table, the number of female delegates were only one-third of men. Actually, it was small, but time goes by, the numbers are getting bigger and bigger. And the other table, and this table shows the number of women in leadership role in the World Council of Churches from the same time. According to this table, the number of women delegates has gotten higher than before. To conclude, the women leaders had strategies to enlarge the status of women in the churches. Their strategies were to stand up for themselves, documenting for historical momentum, investment, surveying, and convening and speaking in gathering, and working together, solidarity. Women were responsive to changing times, resisting myths and own prejudice, transforming leadership through the practical practice of faith rather than dwelling in theory. Women formed their own global solidarity with one other woman and strategically cooperated with male leaders to establish the first Women's Committee at the founding assembly of the World Council of Churches. They worked together with the women's movement and the ecumenical movements within the organization, making a significant contribution to change the ecclesiology to emphasize the preparatory lay people. Nevertheless, as you know, we find only trace of women in the historical records. Therefore, we should develop and disseminate women's history widely to ensure the inclusive leadership in the church and society. Thank you for your listening.